I have these Prima Birds that I have fallen in love with. Like, they are so amazing. You haven't done a smooth live show yet? Okay, then I'm in good company, because if y'all, let me tell you something. My world is never smooth. I think I would believe that Jesus is coming if everything went smooth. I'm going to use my distress markers, and this is how I store mine. I just bought one of these little tubs from Walmart, Target, something like that. And I just store all of mine in here. Super fancy, right? And then these are the Prima Birds. Let me show you the card that we're going to make today. And I think we're only going to probably have time for one, but I have fallen in love with these birds. They are like my super all-time favorite birds of all time. Like, I have been painting them all weekend long. Totally in love. And this is the one we're going to try and do today. And when I show you how easy this is, you guys are just going to go goo-goo. But look, it's flat. So these are easy to mail. You could easily put a sympathy sentiment on here, a happy birthday. I like to leave the sentiments blank and then add them when I'm ready to mail the card. This would also make a fantastic gift idea for someone. I know, like, I don't know, a Secret Santa kind of thing, a Sunday school class, Secret Sister sort of thing, or, you know, someone in your office if you wanted to do up like a stack of cards with some thinking of you or thank you or happy birthday. Who doesn't need a birthday card at least 12 times during the year, right? So these are fantastic ways for you to share some of your art with others to share with their friends, you know. And then if you plop on the back of it who made it, you know, then if you have a source for selling them, that would be great too. But here's another card that I made. This is my favorite one, but today we're going to do this one. This one was a little more complex. It took me several hours to paint this one. You guys don't want to be tortured by that. This one is also one of my favorite ones, and this one was actually an uh-oh that almost ended up in the trash, and then I had a stroke of genius and decided to fussy cut the little guy out, because apparently I have been writing the letter M since, what, kindergarten or before, and for some reason my brain just did this whole, like, I think I had a mini seizure or something, because the letter M looked like a mix between a W and an H and something really weird, or I don't know, something happened in my brain, and the letter M went all over the place. So I was like, wow, I just spent like 2 hours coloring this card to have this mess up on the sentiment that I was handwriting. So I started to throw it away, and then I always put things to the side and think, well, I'll come back to it, because if nothing else, I could have fussy cut out the bird and actually used it on something else. And then when I got to looking at it, I said, well, I'll just cut him out. Well, when I started cutting him out, I thought, well, why don't you make him look more dimensional? So what I did was I just cut him out and put him up on a pop dot and colored a background and sort of did it a little out of focus so that he looks like he's in a different elevation in the tree. So it turned out to be one of my favorite things. No, you think I'm being silly, but I'm serious. For some reason, my daughter's been telling me this a lot lately. She's like, Mom, I think you're having like these little mini seizures, because it's like I'm not completing sentences, I'm not finishing things. I don't know if it's stress, I don't know if it's just the time of year, a lot of work going on. I don't know what it is, but I don't know. I've been writing the letter M my entire life, and for some reason it looked like a cross between an H and a W and I don't know what it was. Anyway, so I hope I don't have to hit a record button or something. I don't see one. I hope it's doing it automatically. So what I'm going to start out with is I always purchase watercolor paper. This is the Canson watercolor paper. This is the 9x12. It's cold press. And I always purchase a stack of this, and then I cut it down to card size in sections. Like I just whip out a couple pieces of it, cut it down into card sizes. And I'm going to use the smooth side. Now, I usually cut my panels about 1/4 of an inch bigger than what my final size is going to be, because I like to tape them to the board, and then I can always come back and trim them down to fit my card. So I'm just using that old-fashioned blue painter's tape to tape this down. I have the smooth side up. You could use the rough side if you wanted to, but in this case I think that the smooth side will be better, because well, you got to do some stamping, and I'm afraid that if you did the stamping on the textured side, it would be a little more it would be harder to stamp on this. Thank you, Peggy. I'm so sorry it's not in focus. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to do. I've tried. I will get better at this YouTube thing. Like I said, I'm recording from a separate source, so if this is beyond blur, I just won't make it live, and I'll put this one up live. So when Jamie posted these birds, OMG, OMG, let me tell you something. I was in love, in love, in love, in love. I asked for these to be stamps because they were hand-drawn when I saw them. And I didn't know that they were already in production, because like a week later the stamps were released, and I was like, oh, you listened. And then I realized, not really. Prima doesn't really have like this, I don't really have like this connection with Prima where they listen to what I say and they just do it. I wish I did, but they don't do that. They don't really care what my opinion is, but I like to believe that they did. Anyway, so I was so excited when I finally found them in one of my local scrapbook stores. So I purchased them. Now, for those of you who are interested in them, I tried to find them online. I did find them at Amazon, and the company that I found them with only had 6 copies of them. So I put a link on my Facebook wall. So if somebody wants to drop the link in there, go ahead. But there's a link to them to an Amazon store there. If you have a store that is a local scrapbook store and you'd like to drop a link, go ahead. But I'm telling you right now, I have already gotten my money's worth out of them already. Like, I can't, I mean, I'm telling you straight up, I've already gotten my money's worth. So today I'm going to use this little guy, and I'm also going to use this little guy and this little guy. And the rest of this I'm just going to put to the side for now. And I'm going to start with my card being horizontal. And I'm also going to use, pardon my reach, I've pulled out a couple of distress inks here. Now, because this is video and it's going to be hard to see, ideally I would want to stamp with antique linen. Shannon. I would want to stamp with antique linen because it's super, super light. But because you guys are never going to see that on video, I am going to go ahead and stamp this bird with tea dye. Now, he's going to be a little darker and he's going to have a little bit of a ridge because I'm stamping him with tea dye. But remember, if you want to stamp him with either pumice stone or antique linen, then you won't have the ridge that I'm going to have. I just don't think you guys are going to be able to see it if I stamp him with the antique linen right now. Okay? So keep that in mind. Now I'm also going to pull out a couple of brushes. I have, this one is, these are my favorite brushes. This is a Low Cornell Soft Comfort number 10. And then I'm also going to pull out, what did I do with it? It was on my desk. I got all flustered here. And I also have a round number 1 liner. So these are the 2 brushes you're going to need. And then I also have some water off to the side here. And I also have just a distressing tool. And that's for later on. And then I also have a stamping block and a paper towel for mopping up my water. And then my distress inks. So my ink colors that I'm going to focus on today are going to be evergreen bow, tumbled glass, picket fence, or no, cracked pistachio, yeah, peeled paint, pumice stone, ground espresso, which you could substitute this out for twigs, any brown, dark brown color that you have, gathered twigs or whatever. No, that's not it. Where is it? I think it's worn lipstick that I used, and whatever other color kind of comes to mind as I start working through this. I might use a little, I didn't in the original one, but I think I might use a little mustard seed because I like the look of that. So we're going to start out, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint my background before I do my bird. So I also have over here a little spray bottle of water, and everybody knows Distress ink works with water. Now if you don't want to use Distress ink, you can do this exact same technique with your Tombow pens. You can also use your any kind of dye-based pen that's water-based. You could use watercolors. You could use anything really that is water-based. I just want to show you how you can do it with your Distress inks for today. So I'm going to wet this really good, and I'm talking through this because I want this moisture to soak into this watercolor paper. This paper is a 140-pound bond, so it's super thick, and taping it down to this board is going to keep it from warping too terribly bad. So then I'm going to take my, probably going to say my tumbled glass, and I'm just going to put some off on my board over here to the side. Well, there you go. It's all just going to kind of go in and out, focusing in and out. Let me try something really fast. Let me get that to focus. See, that focusing in and out would make me sick to my stomach, and I would have probably already left me by now. Let me try something. I'm trying to see if I can get this to manually focus on there, and then just tell it to stop autofocusing. Alright, so I think that's better. I've told it to stop autofocusing, so maybe that'll help with some of the video quality now. Okay, so I want this to soak up some water, and I have this tumbled glass that I've put over here on top of my mat. And I'm just going to take my thicker of the brushes, and I'm going to wet it really good, and I'm going to mop up that color, and I'm just going to add it liberally here in the center of my mat. And then I'm going to come back with this yellow, because I think I really like the way the yellow looks when you add it with the blue. It turns like this really nice green color. Everybody knows that, right? But I like how it's going to kind of mesh with that blue a little bit and make it look like the depth of field in a tree. Like, say, maybe it was a little out of focus. Now remember that this is watercolor, so as this dries, it's going to dry a little bit lighter than what you're seeing on your paper. So don't panic if you look up and it goes, oh, it's so dark. It's not going to be that dark. Trust me, by the time we add layers and layers of color, it is not going to be that dark. Is that better, guys? I think we have found the magic, the sweet spot, if you will, of the camera. Okay, so it's primarily yellow right now, but I'm going to let that sit for just a second and just kind of soak that pigment into the paper and get it really good and colorful. Maybe grab up some more of this blue, and this is just the tumbled glass, and I'm just going to kind of work it in all around, and I'm just giving a really nice wash in the background so that my bird just doesn't look like he's elevated. He looks like he has a little bit of depth there. Then I'm going to take my paper towel and just very lightly press it and lift, and that's going to help to pick up some of that color and just kind of help to soften it just a bit. Okay? Then I'm going to hit it with my heat gun. I want to make sure this is really good and dry before I begin the next step. Does anybody have any questions? Like I said, I'm recording from a different source, so hopefully, if for some reason this does not work out, then we have it from a different source. Okay, so now it's time for my bird, and I want to make sure I leave enough room for my sentiment, and this is still just a bit damp. The reason I want to make sure this is dry is because everyone knows that distress is actually reactive with water, so the last thing we want to do is to stamp this and have it bleed out all over our watercolor paper. While I'm doing this, let me talk a little bit about watercolor paper and why you use it, because it is different than cardstock. And if you were to add this much water to cardstock, it would bead up on you. It's not made to handle water. And then, I mean, while you could get some decent results with it if you were careful and you used a really good quality cardstock, it's not ideal. And another thing too is the watercolor paper is actually designed to trap water. So as water is added to it, for layman's terms, the water, the pigment, when you add the pigment, will only go where water is. So if the paper is dry, then the pigment is not going to bleed out into the drier areas. It's only going to be trapped right where the moisture is in the paper fibers. So that's how watercolor paper is designed. Whereas if you've ever noticed, if you're using cardstock, you get this wicking effect. That's because the paper is not designed to handle all of that moisture. So there's probably a much more technical way of saying that, but Tonya's a little flustered thanks to the camera. Now again, if you're doing this at home where you can see and it's right there over you, you're going to use antique linen to do your stamping. But because I'm doing this on camera and I want you guys to be able to see where my stamping is, I'm going to use a little bit darker distress ink, and I'm going to use tea dye. Okay, so I'm going to just ink up my bird, and I don't care if he's perfectly inked. What I do care about is I want a perfect impression on the first pass, because, and this paper is a little bit buckled, so I want to be real careful here, because I don't want it to lift and rock. I want to get a good impression. I can always ad lib areas, but if it rocks and it gives me two sets of wings, he might look a little funny, okay? Now, I'm not saying it has to be absolutely perfect, but I am saying that you want to make sure that you don't have two sets of tail feathers or two beaks. He would look a little odd. And while we do love odd critters, we want him to look as perfect as he could be. So this is where I'm going to put him. And I'm just going to lightly press. You don't have to give him CPR. Just lightly press. Make sure since this is watercolor paper and it does have a slight texture to it, you do want to make sure that all of your detail is actually pressed into the paper. And as you can see, you do have here a really nice image of the bird. Now it's going to look just like Tonya went ahead and colored this bird from scratch when she's all done. But in reality, only you and I know that I did not draw him out from scratch. Okay, so where did my other little stamp go? The one with the flowers. Did I pull it out? No. Okay. So now we have this flower. And I'm going to put one going up around here. Like this. So, where's my stamp? I may have random people just kind of show up and start talking to me because they're not used to me being home this time of day, and they're not used to me broadcasting this time of day, so, you know, bear with me if someone shows up or calls. My house is Grand Central Station on any given day. You never know who's going to just bebop in unexpected. I kind of prefer it that way. I've kind of conditioned the kids in my neighborhood to, oh, Mama Tonya's home. Okay, so now I don't want all of my flowers looking like they're coming from the same direction, so I'm going to pop some of them coming this way. And notice I'm not re-inking because that's okay. I don't need each one of these to be absolutely perfect because these are just guides. Remember, they're just guides. I can still see that. You probably can't because the quality of the video is probably pretty yucky, but I can still see it. But now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of see where this bulb is going to have, like, I don't want this guy inside of this bulb, so I'm going to just pull it off. I'm just going to wipe it away and just place that stamp there. And then maybe one more right here. I don't want to overdo it too much because I do want to be able to add the little ones in there. In fact, I think I'm just going to, I've got 3 of those. Let's just add a couple of those little ones. And where did the little one go? He has done flown the coop. Alright, well, instead of wasting time, oh, he's stuck to my arm. Look at that. It's stuck to my arm. I'm having a day. Next time I decide to try and do something new, I should probably test it first, right? Okay, so this one is going to come up maybe this way. And right in here, he's going to overlap that bulb right there. So I'm just going to rub that ink away right there. And place that right in there. And remember, we're going to kind of fill in some spots too. So I'm not really worried about complete coverage. Maybe one coming up like this. And then, you know, I might want to put one right here. So this time, only thing I want on there is going to be the bulb part. I don't want the stem at all. So I'm just going to place it right there. Okay. Now it's time for the fun stuff, the coloring. And when I show you how easy this is, y'all are going to die. Okay, you're going to say, wow, she's not as talented as I thought she was. She's really, really, this is so easy. Okay, so I'm going to start with the cracked pistachio. And the cool thing is these birds almost look iridescent because of these colors. So when you use the distress inks, you have a couple of different ways you can use them. You can go ahead and flick. I'm going to flick like a feathering motion. I'm going to start where I want my pigment to be the darkest. And on the bird's wings, I want it to be from the tip, I want it to be the darkest. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to flick out from the tip at the base of every one of these leaves using the lines as a guide. And I'm just going to kind of flick it in. Same thing, there's like a little ridge on the feather. Maybe if I pull the stamp up, you guys can see. But there's a little ridge right here on the stamp. And I'm going to flick along that area as well, because I want that area to be concentrated pigment too. I don't want to get too deep into here because part of my bird is going to be gray. So I'm going to put the lid back on here, and I don't know if you guys know this or not, but somebody in YouTube world called me out on it, so I'm going to tell you guys about it. If you put your lids on and you see that little piece of black right there, they are not sealed. You need to press them until they click, and then you don't see any black on either side so that they're sealed up. Now, the cool thing about these pens is that they're reactive with water, which means I can leave this and go cook dinner and come back, and I can always reactivate this pigment further down the road. They don't have to be perfect. I mean, I don't have to do it immediately like you do with some things. So it's not permanent. So I'm going to take my #1 round liner, and I'm going to, it's wet with clean water, and I'm just going to get all of the extra moisture off, and starting back up here at the top, I am just going to flick along those lines and sort of blend that color out all the way down. And just give a really nice wash. I'm trying to be very careful not to go outside the reach of the lines of the bird. Now, as I color over it, the tea stain dye is becoming transparent because it's acting with water and it's mixing with that cracked pistachio, and it's becoming part of that color family, or it's blending with it. And all I'm doing is flicking that color right in and working it in. And as I work it in, it's becoming softer, and it's also giving me a second value to the pigment. So I have the darker color, that's the true color, but then it's pulling in the lighter color as well. And I'm going to pull that up to the base of his wing because I want a lot of this wing color to have that lighter pigment in it. But notice that what I'm getting here is a lighter shade of the same color. So now I'm going to come back with my evergreen bow. This time, instead of doing direct color, because this is wet, if I were to come back in and add color directly to this, I would have a mess. So instead, I'm going to come over to my board, and I'm going to scribble some of this evergreen bow onto my board. I'm going to come back with my my brush. I'm going to pick some of that pigment up with my brush, and I'm going to come back in and blend some of that color into the bird feathers. And this is where we're going to get that tone on tone effect, because it's going to pull in some more of those blues, where the cracked pistachio is more of a green color, the evergreen bow has more of the blue colors, and that's where we're going to get that iridescence in his wing colors. Now, I didn't dream up this bird color. He is my favorite color, I will tell you that. But I went and found, I did a Google search that said birds, and I just looked for birds that were my favorite color. That's all. I mean, it was just that simple. Now, don't overwork this. If you notice that the colors are not quite what you like, leave it alone. Just let it be. Because watercolors will always dry a little bit lighter than what you see. Another hint is that I don't want to come back in here right now and go directly into a color like, okay, his head is gray. So I don't want to come in and start adding gray right in here because all of this is still wet. And like I said before, this paper's wet, so what's going to happen is these colors are going to wick together, and that's not the look I want. So right now I'm going to move on over to here. So this time I'm going to take my worn lipstick and I'm going to add some of that to my board, grabbing my wet brush. I'm going to just start at the base, and I'm going to flick color up into my flower, following the lines as a guide and staying within the shadowed areas of the flower. And these are the shadowed areas that are defined by the stamp. Now notice that as I start coloring out, the pigment becomes lighter and lighter on the first pass. I haven't done anything other than the first bit of color that I laid down was highly concentrated, and then as the brush worked out, it became a lighter pigment. Okay, so I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm going to come back and blend it in just a minute, but I'm going to leave it alone for now. And now we're going to wet our brush, kind of mop up a little bit of the extra moisture, pick up some more of that pink, and this time we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it with one of these little smaller bulbs. And it's the same process, following the guide of the lines that are already put down by the stamp. Remember, watercolor is always going to dry lighter than the color you're seeing at the moment. Always. You can always add more color too. And the cool thing about watercolor as opposed to acrylics is once it's dry, you can always lift color. You can add it, you can take it away. Always. So now I've flipped my board around. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to add some more. Again, just starting at the base and flicking upwards in a feathery type motion. And I want these little spots to be somewhat irregular around the tips. And just filling in. I can always add darker lines later. I'm just adding my base coat of pigment at the moment. Now, how many of you think you can do this? This is just coloring. Now, some of these, I want them to stay a little lighter. I am so sorry this is so out of focus. I've got to figure out this camera thing because it's going to drive me nuts. Okay, so I'm out of pigment, so I'm going to come back over here, add a little more to this. And notice that by putting the pigment down on the board, here comes Sam. He's going to try and get my lap. Hold on. He's a German Shepherd, and he thinks he's a lap dog. Hi, Sambo. Well, hi. Okay, go lay down. Don't bump the camera. I'm having enough camera problems. I don't even know what I was going to say. I'm sorry. My mind just went blank. Oh, some of these flowers in the background, I may want them to be a little softer. So if you just add a little more water to your pigment, you can make them a little softer. But also notice that I'm getting a little softer color anyway by picking up the water with a water brush than I am by adding, you know, the harshness that I had whenever I added the pigment directly to the cardstock from the pen. You know, it looked a lot like a marker when I did it then. Okay, so now these have a base coat of color. We need one more right here. Just one little more right here. One little flower. Okay, so now let's go back and work on our bird because he's had a little bit of a time to dry. And I know that there's pigment here, but I'm going to mop it up anyway because I don't want it to end up spreading everywhere. So now I'm going to come back to my cracked pistachio. And all of my colors have kind of blended, and that's not the look I'm after. So now it's time to really give some details. So I'm going to put some more of that down. And with a semi-dry brush, I'm going to pick up this. Now the reason I'm doing this, what I'm calling semi-dry, is it's a clean brush, but I'm picking, it's got a little bit of water on it, but I mopped it off with my paper towel because I still want to have some dark ridges when I paint, but I want them to be smooth from the water. So it's a little more concentrated than just trying to pick it up. Let me show you the difference. If I were to put this down directly on here, see how dark that gets? It gets really super dark. So I'm just going to stay in my really dark areas for that. And then maybe just blend out the tips. And Jamie really has made this super, super simple because she's already given you all of the guides. Use the lines that she has given you as lines or guides for feather details, because they're already there. And whenever you use the stamp, the Distress stamp ink for your inking, then it disappears. So you're not stuck with these black lines, and it looks like you actually colored these or drew these birds yourself. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that right there. I am actually going to hit this with the heat gun. I want it to be really good and dry. Anybody have any questions? Now let's do the gray. So with the gray, we're going to do the same thing. Pumice Stone is my gray of choice. This time I'm going to use this bigger brush. And I've got it really wet. Really wet. In fact, it's probably too wet. And using kind of the belly of the brush, I am going to just kind of swipe across its head. Now because this brush is really wet, it is going to kind of lighten that color out quite a bit. And I don't mind if I rub completely over this entire image, including his eyes and beak, because I can still see it because I use the tea dye, so I will be able to put those details back in. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry for just a second. And I'm going to come back with a brush that is not quite as wet. Pick up some richer tones of the color. And I'm going to come into his beak area. And you can really see how it's wicking out. And that's fine, because I kind of want around the tip of his head and the crown of his head, I want that to be a little bit darker. So because this is wet, it's really wicking. And if you notice that you get a little bit too much pigment in there, just take a paper towel and dab it, and it will actually remove the color. Okay? Super awesome, right? Super cool. Okay, so let's go back to these guys while that dries a little bit, because that's wicking a little too much, and I don't like using this heat gun if I can avoid it. Now you want to make sure your bulbs on your flowers are really dry before you add your green. But I'm going to come back and I'm going to use the brush tip of this picket fence. Again, pick this color up. You're not wasting it. This is not wasted. It's not that much. And you are going to just flick right up into the base of that flower. Then I'm going to follow that guide all the way around to form my leaf. Same thing here. I'm going to find where that bulb is and flick all in there and color this in. And then I'm going to follow this around. Same thing here. No water on this. I'm just going straight in with the green. The reason for that is because I really feel like this is kind of like a tree almost. So I kind of want it to be a little darker in color. Like a tree branch. And I'm going to add a little bit of color to it, because a little bit of water to it, because the water is actually going to help it to blend out a little bit. Same thing here, flick it in. And believe it or not, guys, we are almost finished with this card. I mean, we are so close. Now, we're going to have some awkward little transitional areas in here because of the way the stems kind of grow. But that's okay. We're going to fix that by adding some leaves. So what I've done here is I'm just going to grab up some water with my liner brush and just sort of help to blend this Distress ink out a little bit. Just kind of give it a little bit of help, and if the stems go a little bit fuzzier, a little bit wider than what you colored, that's fine. It's just a shadow and a highlight, right? Same thing here. Just kind of help to blend them out. And a thing I like about this is if the pink happens to get down into the stem, again, it's okay. Whoops, don't throw your brush at your water, just kind of lay it in there. Because I think it adds a little bit of interest to it when it has a little bit of that pink in it, in my opinion. Okay, so there's that. And we're going to add some more details and darkness too by adding a little bit of the brown in there too in just a minute. So once we get all of that in there, now my bird should be just about dry enough to where I can add his beak. And he's sort of free floating right now because my stems don't really go over him because I didn't put one in there. But that's okay. We'll fix it. Okay, so now I'm going to come back in with my pumice stone, and this time I'm going to use the fine side of the brush, or the pen, and I'm just going to trace around where that beak is. And these birds have sort of a sad look on their face, so I'm just going to put a couple of little wisps to make them look a little happier. Color in their eyes, and their eyes are black, but there's a little white dot to kind of look like the catch light in their eyes. And then the beaks kind of come in at a point a little bit. So I'm going to kind of color that in. Again, you're just following the lines that Jamie placed down for you. I know it's probably hard to see because the camera won't focus right, but all I'm doing is blending out. I'm just taking that liner brush and blending that color. Okay, and then just to give a little more detail, I'm going to take and put a little bit more of this pumice stone on my block here. Get a little bit of water, and now this time in a very circular motion, because see, his head comes around circle like this, in a very circular motion right here, and that's a bit dark. I'll be honest with you, that's a bit dark. I'm going to just add a little more water. And then remember what I told you, you can lift color. Just add more water and blend it out. But by dragging your brush like in a C fashion, what you're doing is you're showing some shape. And just kind of blend it out over his back, pull in some of that. He's a happy little bird. And then if you take your napkin and just lift, you can lift some of that out. He's a happy little bird. Okay, now I'm not super crazy with this tea-dyed color around his head. Like I said, I used the antique linen in the original. So I think what I'm going to do is come back with some pumice stone and go with a hard edge right across there, just on this particular bird, because I used the darker color. I like it to look seamless, and he kind of looks a little bit stamped, and I don't like that. So if you use antique linen, you shouldn't have that problem. So I'm just showing you how to blend that back in. Remember, if his head is here, then the very back of his head is going to be the darkest point. So you want a little bit of a shadow right at the base of his neck, like right in here. And I'm not sure if I want this to be pumice stone or if I want it to be the cracked pistachio, but we'll come back with this. We'll start out with this and blend it out. But you really want that, you want the base of his head to be a little darker than right in here. Right in here it's going to be a little bit lighter, simply because the light on his back is going to be a little lighter here. And then through here, this would be where the shadow falls at the base of his head. And that's what gives him depth. And then right through here, under his chin, he may have, under his breast, right here, he may have a little more color. It's all about shadows and highlights. Okay, so then we come back to, I'm going to bring in some of this, this is the evergreen bow. Oop, wrong end. And then I'm going to just add touches of this and water it down really good, just right across the base of his back, just to bring in a little more of this blue. It almost clashes a little bit with the cracked pistachio, but I think that if you look at the birds themselves, there's a lot of color in their feathers, really a lot of color. And I think that's what made him look so realistic, was the fact that you were seeing so many different colors when you looked at him. There's lots of yellows, there's lots of greens and blues, and the cracked pistachio has a lot of yellow in it, where the evergreen bow has a lot of that blue in it. So you get those variations in colors and tones. Now remember, he's really kind of dark right now, but he's gonna look lighter in just a few minutes. So as this dries. So now here's where some of the detail comes in with his feet. I'm going to take, this is the gathered twigs. No, this is the ground espresso. And I am going to color in his feet. And remember, he doesn't have anything he's clinging to right now. He's just sort of free floating here, but that's okay. We're going to add that in just a second. And then I'm going to come back in here and just put some harsher lines, just a few little details right here in his beak and all. That's going to give him a little light. And look at how much he's already coming to life. Now we need some details in here while he dries just a bit. And that's where I'm going to come back with the fine tip on this, and I'm just going to flick some light right in lines right into this area right here on these. And I might have to use this. And I'm very light touch, very, very light touch. Same thing here. And then a little bit right in here. And then this guy. Remember, it's going to be the darkest right at the base. And then if I wanted to put a few more little dots in there, I could. And then I'm just going to come back with that liner brush. Again, I want it to be not sopping wet. I'm going to just grab some of that pigment and just kind of almost scrub and blend. I guess I've got that a little too dry. Just kind of blend that out so that it doesn't look like markers. Just kind of work that in. And remember, this is something you can do in front of a television, but this is also something you can start today and come back and look at it and say, he needs a little bit of work, and work on it a little bit tomorrow. And you know, and as long as you have water, you can always take and add or subtract pigment. Does anybody have any questions? I love these colors. I mean, how can you go wrong, right? I think these would be really pretty with yellows too. Let me get back up here for this camera. I have a camera that is recording, for those of you who joined us late, that is recording in a separate source, so that if for some reason the recording comes back and it's really super blurry, I don't know why it's so blurry. I think it's a YouTube thing, This is the first time I've ever broadcasted in this environment, so I'm not really sure what I've done wrong or if I've done anything wrong. But I've recorded from a separate source just in case. This isn't stellar. Okay, so we need something for him to sit on because he's sort of just out here free floating. So I'm just going to kind of, how can we do this? Just kind of put something coming across here in his feet. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, branches on a tree aren't always tipped with flowers, right? And we do have those cherry blossoms, but I don't know. I personally think you could freehand one of these little bulbs like it's coming out right here. They're not that hard. Make it look like little tips here. And then just kind of blend. Whoops. If there's a bead of water on your brush, get it off before it ends up being a mess. So now let's just add a few leaves and we're sort of done. I mean, there's a few water spots in here. Let me show you how to clean those up. All you do is you take this water brush and very softly in a circular motion just work that pigment right along that water line until it softens back out. And it'll get softer. And then on this one, I think I just want to come back in here and just define out some of these little leaves. Leaves. Listen to me. His wings. This little guy is a little bit darker, like I said, than my original because I went a little darker with him because I had to use the tea dye Distress ink. And so I wanted him to have a little bit of a darker look. Yes, don't cringe. I'm adding the ground espresso to the tips of his wings. The reason for that is the bird that I used in my sample has black tipped wings. And he's the one on my webpage. And so what I'm doing now is I'm just wetting my brush and pulling some of that out so it blends a little bit better. And this is going to kind of help to mask some of that brown that you're going to see around his body there. And then I'm going to come back with some of this, this is the gray color, pumice stone, and just tip the edges of these wings. Again, he's a little bit darker than the original. But look at that. He's done. Yay! Okay. Now, for some simple little leaves on this branch, okay? And then we're done. I'm going to take and put out a little bit of green. And I'm going to take my liner brush, pick up some water, and I'm just going to kind of squiggle out some just irregular lines. Nothing fancy. Nothing too fancy. And then, you know, just kind of pull them out in different directions. Maybe one coming out this way. It's okay if they go behind a flower because leaves, you know, they kind of go everywhere, right? I'm going to let those dry for just a second. And while those dry, I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'm going to take a little bit of pink on my, and I'm just going to drop it right in the middle of that where I've added that green. Just kind of drop it in there. Let it wick. That's my word for today, wick. Let it wick. This is so relaxing to me. Like, I can have one of those primal days. You know what I'm talking about. One of those days at work where you just wanted to just explode all day. And I can come home and do something like this and totally be at ease. So I'm loving this, like totally loving it. Let that dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to grab out a pen and I'm going to use, oh, let me see here. I have this, I love these pens, guys. This is the Uniball Impact 207. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with your handwriting, by all means use a stamp. If you have, like we talked at the beginning of the show, those little mini strokes where you've written an M your entire life, but for some reason it wants to look like a W and an H, and you don't want to mess up something that you've just spent hours coloring, because that does happen, then by all means, someone just came in the door, by all means go ahead and who just walked in? By all means, go ahead and stamp it. Just get yourself out a stamp and stamp it. But I feel like if I'm gonna go through all the trouble to watercolor something, then I'm gonna hand letter it. And I have been practicing off on my own somewhere else. So I'm gonna just do my best. And I need Christmas cards right now, so Christmas it's going to be. So I'm going to start out with the word Christmas because it's the biggest word I have, and hopefully I'm going to spell it right because, you know, I'm a little flustered today and you know how that goes. So I recommend doing this. Write it out on something. Y'all think I'm crazy, but so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to very carefully write out very carefully. This is one of those instances too where you really want to make sure that your paper's good and dry. And you want to write your letters so that there's lots of space between. The letters. So that you can do your downstrokes. Now, it's not perfect, but you know what? I don't care. And then I'm going to come back with my downstrokes. On every part of the letter that would be a downstroke, I'm going to add a little weight. If I misspelled that, y'all don't tell me. Just kidding. Okay, so everything that would have been a downstroke, you're just gonna, it's hard to do this where the camera can see. Again, if you want something that's a little more elegant or you don't like your handwriting, stamp it. I can tell you now, I am much better at this than I am at stamping. I have to be quiet because I can't write. I can't write and talk at the same time because I will actually start writing what I'm saying. I'm such a goober that way. Anyway, it's probably not the best handwriting, but I can clean it up later. But anyway, there you go. There's our little bird. So what do you guys think? So now all we have left to do is we need to put some details in our little leaves. So we're going to come back over here and just draw in. You really want these to be dry, and they're not quite dry yet. But just kind of draw in some of these little details on the leaves. And we're done. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I know it's been a little bit goofy, but hopefully it all works out. And like I said, I did save this from another source, so hopefully it worked out. I'll catch you guys later.